Good afternoon, Professor. So, this week I decided to go into chapter 15 in our book, which basically asks journalists how they should conduct themselves when they're pressured by government entities to change their story after the fact that it's been published. So, the whole chapter started with a journalist named Catherine Lime, who was a reporter for the Minnesota Daily, and she was a new journalist. She was just starting out and wanting to get some stories that helped her build up her chops and give her credibility. And she came across this student organization at the University of Minnesota, and it was a collection of students from North Africa countries like Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, different places like that. And she kind of covered the group as a whole, but she was told that just to kind of give the story more of a human interest element, she needed to kind of narrow down one student to interview. And she did. There was one student from Tunisia who was studying English and American literature. She interviewed him, and during the interview, he gave some comments that he was commenting on the American education system, but also the system in Tunisia. And she published the article, the journalist, and immediately after she was called by the State Department saying she needs to change or take down the story because she didn't. There was possible side effects for the student's family who still live back in Tunisia. So the newspaper was basically confronted with whether or not they needed to change the story. And one thing I would comment on, and I'm sure it's hard to do in this newspaper industry where everything's very minute by minute to minute. But one thing I think we need to try to do as journalists is examine our subjects a little bit more, do a little bit more research, because part of the conflict here is nobody on this staff for the newspaper knew much about Tunisia. And I think considering, especially after 9/11, there's been a lot of focus in the news about Middle East and Middle East politics. So even if you're a casual person following the news, you've seen it brought up again and again to, I think, realize that maybe we need, if you're dealing with someone from that area, you need to kind of examine the cultural norms there and what kind of side effects it could have for their subject if they were to publish this type of material. So I think basically at the end of the day, it just comes down to a little bit more research on the newspaper's part in order to make sure that they're not going to have any side effects down the road for any of their subjects.